Hello, I am Dr. Anand Laxshamanan. I am a software engineer with domain expertise in the area of communications engineering. As regards my academics, I have a doctorate in engineering from Indian Institute of Science with specialization in load scheduling in distributed computing systems. And my master's was in Department of ECE in Indian Institute of Science. Along the way during my career, I also got myself a postgraduate degree in management, specializing in finance, a certification program from IIM Ahmedabad, and a leadership program from Ericsson. In my career, which spans over 24 plus years post my doctorate, I have worked in several multinational companies like IBM, Motorola, Cisco, Hewlett-Packard, and Ericsson. I am here to actually talk a little bit about the software industry and what it takes to build a career for oneself in this industry. When I am talking about the software industry, I will be actually talking about two parts. One is basically the software industry itself and also a domain industry. So I will be intermittently talking a little bit about both since they actually go hand in hand. The software industry is a fairly mature industry, but at the same time, change is something which is permanent in this industry. Technology keeps evolving and changing every few years. So we can never get wedded to a particular technology or particular programming language or particular ways of working. They just keep evolving and keep changing, and we have to keep refreshing ourselves. And at the same time, the software industry has to be treated more as a tool. Or rather, the software has to be treated more as a tool, like we look at, say, for example, mathematics. As we have in mathematics, there is a function, there is certain inputs, variables. For example, y is equal to f of x. So x is a variable which determines what the output variable y is going to be. So long as we understand that software also works something in a very similar fashion, we will be able to appreciate the difference that exists between a software and the underlying domain industry. So moving on, just to elaborate a little bit more about the distinguishing factors of the software and the domain. Now, software is basically mechanism of achieving certain functionality. So I will call it the how part of it. The features that define what is to be achieved will be driven more by the domain. But how that feature is actually implemented and achieved is driven by the software. Now the domain, coming to the domain itself, the domain gives the inputs, it provides the platform. I would call it the core hardware platform on which this software will run. It defines the situation, the where and when certain features are going to be used. It also determines the functionalities or what is to be done or the features that has to be executed. And it also owns the users. So basically users are always of the domain and never of the software. And the users happen to be the who. So where, when, what and who are determined by the domain, while the how is determined by the software. If we understand this distinguishing feature very clearly, we will be able to very well demarcate about this or demarcate the difference between the software and the domain in which it works, number one, and also know more about the limitations of the software industry itself. Very often this actually gets a little bit mixed up and we'll end up with a lot of confusion here. Now coming to the software itself, career in software, I will divide it into three parts. The first part is basically the programming, the logic, etc., which is intertwined with the domain. The logic part is intertwined very well with the domain. The business logic, everything has a lot to do with the functionality. And as we already saw, the functionality is actually driven by the domain. While the program is basically the language, is more the language that we choose to implement this software in. The second part is the architecture. The architecture happens to be the building blocks of the system. So this is determined by the software building blocks and influenced significantly by the domain. And the third factor is the testing. It involves different test processes and it kind of standalone. It is an independent, the set of process that drives the testing is independent of the software itself. So it is independent of the program, but it is very much dependent on the domain. The functionality that is being tested and the user testing, etc. is driven by the domain. And talking about the current market stage, as I already indicated, software industry is actually at a very mature stage. Technology is evolving and changing, and every few years newer languages are getting added. They are replacing the older languages and the older languages become obsolete. New technologies keep appearing. The underlying logic and the approach to the software design and development is far more stable. And that is actually driven more by the rate at which the domain itself is evolving. Now, when we come to the resource needs that exist in the software industry, as we already saw the three types or the three categories in the software industry. First category is the set of architects who understand the requirements, translate the user requirements into system requirements, and they have a very sound understanding of the domain and technology. The second category is the developers who are primarily programmers. They are very well versed in the language being used. More than mere programmers, they also have an ability to design the modules. So basically, once the logic or the requirements is given, they have the ability to design the logic and create the low-level design from which the next stage is developing the program. And the third category is the testers. The testers are very strong in the domain area. Their ability to design the right test cases, very precise knowledge of the input to output transformation, all these need a lot of information on the domain. They are very well versed in the test methodologies, strategies required for planning and designing the test cases, etc. They will preferably need to be very strong in automation, because as we move along, the evolution is more towards automation and testing. For automation, knowledge of automation framework is required. Strategy for automation, including knowledge of machine learning, robotics, etc. may be required as more and more these areas tend to evolve, and they need to be very strong in scripting. So as regards the future of this industry, this is an industry that will survive for long, that's for sure. But so long as it is viewed as a tool, if it is going to be viewed as an end by itself, then it has already died long back. As domains evolve or change, then the requirements will need to be changed. There will be certain requirements which need to upgrade that knowledge and skills as far as the domain area is concerned. So constant upgradation of skills will be an implicit requirement for being a part of this industry. Continuous learning, being savvy about the evolution of the technologies and trying to always keep abreast and being at the latest cutting edge of the technology will be extremely critical and important requirement in this industry to be very successful. How do I envision the changes to happen in the future? As far as the development is concerned, the focus will shift more towards defining the functionalities and features through business logics, and programming will start giving way to automated code generation. So which means we will need less of developers but more of architects, and our developers also who are more well versed with defining and designing the logics. Coming to the testing part, for testing there is going to be a continued need for testing of new features and functionalities. So as a role, testing will definitely continue to exist, but significant shift towards automation using machine learning, AI, robotic framework, etc. That is definitely going to happen, and that's something that's going to come. So test execution will shift more towards automated execution with very little manual intervention. Now, how do I view India versus the global market? So far, India has primarily been an execution center. So, which means India is used to develop software based on requirements given by the clients, and the clients typically are not from India but abroad. Other countries have been dictating what is required and what technology is to be used. With India gaining on the startup culture, more end-to-end ownership is expected, to be shifting inside. Now, from requirements to determining the architecture, technology to implementing, testing will be driven internally. This can result in challenges to the profit margins. The reason I'm saying this is because most of the software industry in India today has been capitalizing a lot on the currency conversion value. Now, if everything is going to be internal, we will not be able to take benefit of this factor. So, which means this is going to lead us to smart working that will become the norm. So, to maintain the profit margins, which means there will be a significant shift from full-time employment to task-based consultancy. The measure of unit will cease to be time, but it will be more of deliverables. So what I really mean is, instead of saying that a resource will be working for so many months, it will be more driven by certain work or task is given, complete it and get paid for it. So this is the way I expect the nature of work to shift in the country. What are the skills required for this industry? It's core engineering. So that will be a core requirement. Though I say engineering, primarily as I indicated, the software is very intimately connected with the domain. So domain area engineering could take precedence over the computing skills. As I said, computing skills is more seen as a tool, a knowledge of the tool, skills on using the tool, and which means domain area will gain precedence. When I say domain area, examples of domain area I could throw is basically like telecommunication, automation, automotive or space, aerospace. So these are all domain areas where software will play a very significant role, but the domain area will drive the skills that are required for the industry. Then do I mean that one cannot shift from one domain area to another domain area? Shifting will be possible because it's all going to be what the requirements come and how the functionality is going to be used, and so long as one can understand the functionality, that is basically what the transformation has to be done through the software, one can actually be shifting from one domain area to another. But this shifting is going to be a little tricky. It is not going to be straightforward. It will require a lot of effort in actually building up that competency in the new domain area and shifting oneself to the new domain area. So one has to compensate for the lack of the experience in actually quickly ramping up and learning on the new domain area and being able to implement the newer domain area with the software experience that he has. Now coming to the software itself, as I said, it is a changing industry and where the technology keeps changing. Now, as far as the software is concerned, learning the language is the primary requirement. The first language that one learns will be the most difficult, irrespective of what that language is. It could be C, C++, which is more of the old languages, or it could be more of the recent ones like Python or Ruby, etc., which are more of the higher level languages. But learning the first language will be more involved and take a lot of time. And subsequently, the newer languages, as they keep coming up, shifting to the newer languages is not going to be a major effort, and it is not going to be also that significant an impact on one's experience level as we move along. So long as the person keeps abreast and keeps continuously learning as and when new languages appear, he immediately picks up the threads and learns the language and makes himself or herself ready to work with the newer languages. On the skill side, coming on the soft skills side, communications and interpersonal relationships are going to be extremely important and critical. This would include interviewing skills, selling skills, etc. Now, as I indicated, as we move along, the nature of the market is going to be more shifting towards a consulting market rather than a full-time employment market. So the moment we are talking about consulting, one should be able to sell his or her own skills very well. So we are talking about something which is all intimately connected with communications and being able to communicate very well and interpersonal relationships. The second soft skill that will be critical is presentation skills, and a lot of flexibility and learning in short duration. This will be a third skill that will be very important. So which means that person is expected to have an eagerness for continuous learning, to upgrade the knowledge, skills and technology as they keep evolving. and willingness to give up the older technology and grab the newer ones. One can never be wedded to a technology and try to keep holding on to that technology forever. So these are the kind of flexibilities that will be required as part of the soft skill. Now, as a career path, engineering background is definitely critical and it's going to be important. This is going to be the core for any person who is wanting to actually step into this industry, because he should be having an ability to solve problems through the application of the technical concepts. So usually BTech is enough. That is the starting point. But if there is actually a preference for a very specialized area, so domain area, when domain area precedence comes into picture, some of the domain areas would actually require specialization, which means a master's will be required. Strong knowledge of programming and scripting skills. Any one or two prominent languages and scripts will be good enough to begin. Strong foundation in any one of the domain areas. As I said, they have to be aligned to a particular domain area. They cannot call themselves just programmers and be floating programmers into different domain areas. So that potentially it calls for risk. There is a major risk in that area. Their future can be a little bit at risk if they continue to be floating around without any tie-up to a particular domain. With the evolution of machine learning, knowledge of machine learning and applying machine learning to automation could be a significant advantage.